Hi, it's me, Sir JP, and welcome to Philosophy for Senior High School. This is part of my advocacy to reach senior high school students and give them a glimpse of philosophy in its basic and fundamental terms. I am live here from Red Spot Resto Bar in Pavia, the newest hangout place in town. They will be opening tomorrow, October 8th at 3 p.m. Una pa kita sa opening. Anyway, welcome to another episode of quick yet meaningful discussions. Like what I said in the previous episodes, we can discuss philosophy by geographical slice, the Western and Eastern philosophy. Today, we shall focus on Western philosophy during the ancient era. We go back to the time of Socrates, who was recognized as the father of Western philosophy. He was ridiculed because many people thought that he corrupted the minds of young people. Remember that people in ancient Greece believed in gods and their mythological powers rather than logical explanations. It is on this note that Socrates pushed for rational explanations supported by evidences. In his time, Socrates was deeply concerned with how people should behave. He noted that people should do what is good rather than what is immoral. The use of conscience is very important when one decides to continue to live. In fact, Socrates said, "An unexamined life is a life not worth living." Socrates does not have any book written during his existence, but he strongly influenced Plato, who wrote about him in his books. Socrates denied Greek gods recognized by the government, and he was accused for influencing the perspectives of young people. It is on this note that Socrates was sentenced to death by poisoning. He was forced to drink hemlock sap. Socrates was known not because he was claimed by many as a wise man. According to him, he is just someone who explores. He said, "True knowledge exists in knowing that you know nothing." Here is a quick video of Socrates and how he changed the world many centuries ago.
Hello, I am Socrates, and I changed the world. As I speak to you now, I'm sitting in a jail cell in a cave, just outside of Athens. In a few moments, a guard is going to bring me a cup of poisoned hemlock to drink. After I do so, I will become very sleepy, and then I will take my last breaths. But before that happens, I thought I'd share some things with you. I was born in Athens in ancient Greece. People know very little about my history and early life, and I like to keep it that way. You will see that I'm a bit of a troublemaker and like to be a little mysterious. Most people know me as one of the first philosophers of the Western world, but I never saw myself that way. Philosophers tend to think they know a lot about the world, but me? I really don't think I know anything at all. When I returned to Athens after fighting in the Peloponnesian War, I did quite a bit of thinking. You see, in my time, there were many men who were considered wise, but I was very skeptical of this wisdom. In my life and travels, I found that many people who appear or claim to be wise are not actually very wise at all. This is a problem. Because when people believe a man is wise, they tend to blindly follow him, often with terrible consequences. If you don't question this wisdom, you can never discover its flaws. Then knowledge stands still like a stone, instead of growing and changing like a tree. So I started asking questions. I found that when someone makes a claim that something is true, the best way to test that truth is to ask a series of challenging questions. For example, if a man claims that it is virtuous to love the god Zeus, I would ask, what is virtue? What is love? Are there other gods to love? If they cannot even explain what virtue is, how can they say that it is virtuous to love Zeus? If they cannot explain what love is, how can we know if we are really loving Zeus, and therefore that we are virtuous? If someone making these claims cannot answer these challenges, then how can they know the truth of their claim? In my life, I didn't publish any works or write much down for others to read. But many young men in Athens, including a very bright student named Plato, used to follow me around and watch closely as I questioned some of the wisest men in the city. Plato would eventually pass this method down to his student Aristotle, who was the tutor of Alexander the Great. Alexander spread Greek thought to his vast kingdom. When the Romans took over Alexander's empire, they expanded it even larger and spread the Greek tradition even further. Sadly, when the Romans fell, the world entered a long, dark period where knowledge stood still once again. But then something wonderful happened. There was a renaissance of thought and knowledge when people began to revive the works of my students. Science flourished when people realized the power of methodical questioning and testing of claims. In your time, my method of questioning is known as the Socratic, after me, method, and is the basis of modern scientific and philosophical inquiry. And all this because I asked a few questions. Many people think that when someone asks a question, or many questions like I do, that they are unwise. But I think just the opposite. True wisdom is the knowledge of how little you actually know. It is this realization that allows you to start asking questions and get to the real truth. Asking questions may be the best way to get to truth, but it is also a fast way to make enemies. I'm afraid that I embarrassed quite a few very important men in Athens who saw me as kind of a professional smart aleck. When they saw that young men in the city were beginning to question like I did, I was arrested for corrupting the youth of Athens. My student Plato wrote about the trial and how I tried to defend myself using the same method of questioning that I was arrested for. This just made my accusers even angrier. Eventually, when I was convicted, the court asked me what I thought my punishment should be. I said that there should be a meal in my honor every night at the sacred hearth of the city, where great men and Olympic champions are honored. I said that my punishment should be a free meal at that hearth, since I have opened up everyone's eyes to true wisdom. Needless to say, they didn't like that answer at all, seeing it as further proof of my insolence. I told you I was a troublemaker, and sentenced me to death. So, here I am, talking to you. I have to say goodbye to my friends and family now, but don't feel bad for me. I am an old man now, anyway, and I'm happy to be the world's first martyr for the cause of truth. Remember, the only thing you know is that you know nothing. But don't take my word for it, for I know nothing as well.
After Socrates comes his brightest luminary, Plato. Plato was one of those young people who was greatly influenced by Socrates as an educator. He was one of the reasons why Socrates was accused of corrupting the youth. Plato wrote several books which widely influenced the way people think in ancient Greece. He established the first university ever built. This is known as the Academy, where he delivered lectures to his students, including Aristotle. His most famous work, The Republic, envisioned a government led not just by ordinary men, but by philosopher kings. What he meant with this is that leaders must not only be leaders, but also thinkers. He said that only those people who mastered the craft must lead. It is because of this that he was considered as one of the fathers of political science. In his book, he imagined utopia. Justice is the ultimate goal in every civilization. Moreover, according to Plato, women are actually capable to rule a city. Named after him, he developed a school of thought known as Platonism. Let me read. It states that an abstract object is an object that does not exist in space or time, and which is therefore entirely non-physical and non-mental. Aside from this, Plato believed that the world revolves around what we call forms, which serves as guide or operations manual on how to live or use a specific object. To make the imagery of Plato, here's a video from TED Ed.
Few individuals have influenced the world and many of today's thinkers like Plato. One 20th century philosopher even went so far as to describe all of Western philosophy as a series of footnotes to Plato. He created the first Western university and was teacher to ancient Greece's greatest minds, including Aristotle. But even one of the founders of philosophy wasn't perfect. Along with his great ideas, Plato had a few that haven't exactly stood the test of time. So here are brief rundowns of a few of his best and worst ideas. Plato argued that beyond our imperfect world was a perfect, unchanging world of forms. Forms are the ideal versions of the things and concepts we see around us. They serve as a sort of instruction manual to our own world. Floating around the world of forms is the ideal tree and the ideal YouTube channel, and even the ideal justice or ideal love. Our own reality is comprised of imperfect copies of ideal forms. Plato argued that philosophers should strive to contemplate and understand these perfect forms so that they may better navigate our misleading reality. While it may seem silly, the disconnect between the world as it appears and the greater truth behind it is one of philosophy's most vexing problems. It's been the subject of thousands of pages by theologians, philosophers, and screenwriters alike. It raises questions like, should we trust our senses to come to the truth, or our own reason? For Plato, the answer is reason. It alone provides us with at least the potential to contemplate the forms. But reason didn't always pan out for Plato himself. When he sought to situate humankind amongst the animals, he lumped us in with birds. Featherless bipeds was his official designation. Diogenes the cynic, annoyed by this definition, stormed into Plato's class with a plucked chicken, announcing, "Behold, Plato's man." But back to a few good ideas. Plato is one of the earliest political theorists on record, and with Aristotle, is seen as one of the founders of political science. He reasoned that being a ruler was no different than any other craft, whether a potter or doctor, and that only those who had mastered the craft were fit to lead. Ruling was the craft of contemplating the forms. In his Republic, Plato imagined a utopia, where justice is the ultimate goal. Plato's ideal city seeks a harmonious balance between its individual parts and should be led by a philosopher king. Millennia before his time, Plato also reasoned that women were equally able to rule in this model city. Unfortunately, Plato was inconsistent with women, elsewhere likening them to children. He also believed that a woman's womb was a live animal that could wander around in her body and cause illness. This bad idea, also espoused by other contemporaries of Plato, was sadly influential for hundreds of years in European medicine. Furthermore, he thought that society should be divided into three groups: producers, the military, and the rulers, and that a great, noble lie should convince everyone to follow this structure. The noble lie he proposed was that we're all born with gold, silver, or a mixture of brass and iron in our souls, which determine our roles in life. Some thinkers have gone on to credit the idea of the noble lie as a prototype for 20th century propaganda, and the philosopher king as inspiration for the dictators that used them. Should a few bad ideas tarnish Plato's status as one of the greatest philosophers in history? No. Plato gave the leaders and thinkers who came after him a place to start. Through the centuries, we've had the chance to test those ideas through writing and experience, and have accepted some while rejecting others. We are continuing to refine, amend, and edit his ideas, which have become foundations of the modern world.
Before we proceed with Aristotle, let me leave you with a quote from Plato, which states, "Be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle. We always have to begin our day with a smile. Radiate positivity to others. Especially in this time of COVID, we are very fortunate to be alive until today. When you meet others, smile and be kind. It will cost you nothing, yet you make others happy." Our next philosopher is Aristotle, the protege of Plato and the teacher of Alexander the Great, who established the great Roman Empire. He also tutored two future kings, Cassander and Ptolemy. At age 17, he was sent by his parents to the academy. Together with his teacher Plato, they created a comprehensive system of philosophy. In fact, his name Aristotle means the best purpose. Inspired by Plato, he also founded his own school. He rented a space and made it known to the world as the Lyceum, which houses the world's first great library. He wrote more or less 200 books. Sadly, however, only 31 of these books survived. His works, which survived through time, were grouped into four categories. The first one is Organon, which is a set of writings that provide a logical toolkit for use in any philosophical or scientific investigation. Theoretical works, most famously his treatises on animals, cosmology, the physics, and metaphysics. Practical works, notably the Nicomachean Ethics and Politics, both deep investigations into the nature of human flourishing on the individual, familial, and societal levels. And finally, Poetics examine the finished products of human productivity, including what makes for a convincing argument and how a tragedy can instill cathartic fear and pity. Named after him, he developed a school of thought which states that all reasoning does not only deal with words, but with one's actions or behavior. According to him, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. Here is a quick video about Aristotle.
How do you get what you want using just your words? Aristotle set out to answer exactly that question over 2,000 years ago with a treatise on rhetoric. Rhetoric, according to Aristotle, is the art of seeing the available means of persuasion. And today we apply it to any form of communication. Aristotle focused on oration, though, and he described 3 types of persuasive speech. Forensic or judicial rhetoric establishes facts and judgments about the past, similar to detectives at a crime scene. Epidictic or demonstrative rhetoric makes a proclamation about the present situation, as in wedding speeches. But the way to accomplish change is through deliberative rhetoric, or symboleticon. Rather than the past or the present, deliberative rhetoric focuses on the future. It's the rhetoric of politicians debating a new law by imagining what effect it might have. Like when Ronald Reagan warned that the introduction of Medicare would lead to a socialist future spent telling our children and our children's children what it once was like in America when men were free. But it's also the rhetoric of activists urging change, such as Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream that his children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. In both cases, the speakers present their audience with a possible future and try to enlist their help in avoiding or achieving it. But what makes for good deliberative rhetoric besides the future tense? According to Aristotle, there are 3 persuasive appeals: ethos, logos, and pathos. Ethos is how you convince an audience of your credibility. Winston Churchill began his 1941 address to the U.S. Congress by declaring, "I have been in full harmony all my life with the tides which have flowed on both sides of the Atlantic against privilege and monopoly," thus highlighting his virtue as someone committed to democracy. Much earlier, in his defense of the poet Archias, Roman consul Cicero appealed to his own practical wisdom and expertise as a politician. Drawn from my study of the liberal sciences and from that careful training to which I admit that at no part of my life I have ever been disinclined. And finally, you can demonstrate disinterest, or that you're not motivated by personal gain. Logos is the use of logic and reason. This method can employ rhetorical devices such as analogies, examples, and citations of research or statistics. But it's not just facts and figures. It's also the structure and content of the speech itself. The point is to use factual knowledge to convince the audience, as in Sojourner Truth's argument for women's rights. I have as much muscle as any man, and can do as much work as any man. I have plowed and reaped and husked and chopped and mowed, and can any man do more than that? Unfortunately, speakers can also manipulate people with false information that the audience thinks is true, such as the debunked but still widely believed claim that vaccines cause autism. And finally, pathos appeals to emotion, and in our age of mass media, it's often the most effective mode. Pathos is neither inherently good nor bad, but it may be irrational and unpredictable. It can just as easily rally people for peace as incite them to war. Most advertising, from beauty products that promise to relieve our physical insecurities to cars that make us feel powerful, relies on pathos. Aristotle's rhetorical appeals still remain powerful tools today. But deciding which of them to use is a matter of knowing your audience and purpose, as well as the right place and time. And perhaps just as important is being able to notice when these same methods of persuasion are being used on you.
next philosopher is Zeno of Citium, Cyprus. Did you know that Zeno was lost in a shipwreck and found himself to study Socrates accidentally? Here is a quick video for you about Zeno.
You've been stranded thousands of miles from home with no money or possessions. Such a predicament would make many people despair and curse their awful fate. But for Zeno of Cyprus, it became the foundation of his life's work and legacy. The once wealthy merchant lost everything when he was shipwrecked in Athens around 300 BCE. With not much else to do, he wandered into a bookshop, became intrigued by reading about Socrates, and proceeded to seek out and study with the city's noted philosophers. As Zeno began educating his own students, he originated the philosophy known as Stoicism, whose teachings of virtue, tolerance, and self-control have inspired generations of thinkers and leaders. The name Stoicism comes from the Stoa Poikile, the decorated public colonnade where Zeno and his disciples gathered for discussion. Today, we colloquially use the word Stoic to mean someone who remains calm under pressure and avoids emotional extremes. But while this captures important aspects of Stoicism, the original philosophy was more than just an attitude. The Stoics believed that everything around us operates according to a web of cause and effect, resulting in a rational structure of the universe, which they called logos. And while we may not always have control over the events affecting us, we can have control over how we approach things. Rather than imagining an ideal society, the Stoic tries to deal with the world as it is, while pursuing self-improvement through 4 cardinal virtues. Practical wisdom, the ability to navigate complex situations in a logical, informed, and calm manner. Temperance, the exercise of self-restraint and moderation in all aspects of life. Justice, treating others with fairness even when they have done wrong. And courage, not just in extraordinary circumstances, but facing daily challenges with clarity and integrity. As Seneca, one of the most famous Roman Stoics, wrote, "Sometimes even to live is an act of courage." But while Stoicism focuses on personal improvement, it's not a self-centered philosophy. At a time when Roman laws considered slaves as property, Seneca called for their humane treatment and stressed that we all share the same fundamental humanity. Nor does Stoicism encourage passivity. The idea is that only people who have cultivated virtue and self-control in themselves can bring positive change in others. One of the most famous Stoic writers was also one of Rome's greatest emperors. Over the course of his 19-year reign, Stoicism gave Marcus Aurelius the resolve to lead the empire through 2 major wars while dealing with the loss of many of his children. Centuries later, Marcus's journals would guide and comfort Nelson Mandela through his 27-year imprisonment during his struggle for racial equality in South Africa. After his release and eventual victory, Mandela stressed peace and reconciliation, believing that while the injustices of the past couldn't be changed, his people could confront them in the present and seek to build a better, more just future. Stoicism was an active school of philosophy for several centuries in Greece and Rome. As a formal institution, it faded away, but its influence has continued to this day. Christian theologians such as Thomas Aquinas have admired and adopted its focus on the virtues, and there are parallels between Stoic ataraxia, or tranquility of mind, and the Buddhist concept of nirvana. One particularly influential Stoic was the philosopher Epicurus, who wrote that suffering stems not from the events in our lives, but from our judgments about them. This has resonated strongly with modern psychology, and the self-help movement. For example, rational emotive behavioral therapy focuses on changing the self-defeating attitudes people form about their life circumstances. There's also Viktor Frankl's logotherapy. Informed by Frankl's own time as a concentration camp prisoner, logotherapy is based on the Stoic principle that we can harness our willpower to fill our lives with meaning, even in the bleakest situations.
Last but not the least, we shall discuss Epicurus. Like Plato, Aristotle, and Zeno, Epicurus also founded his own school. He established it in the garden known as Hokepos. The difference, however, is that Epicurus' school admitted women, free, and slaves. According to Epicurus, one can be happy if he is free from any pain. This school of thought is known as Epicureanism, which that the main goal is to establish a happy, tranquil life characterized by the absence of pain and fear through analyzed life. To explain more about Epicureanism, here is a quick video.
This is a philosopher who helps us think about money, capitalism, and our runaway consumer societies. Epicurus was an ancient Greek born in 341 BC. What made him famous was that he spent all his life trying to work out the largest puzzle there is. What makes people happy? Philosophers before him had discussed at length what could make people good. Epicurus preferred to look at what's fun. Unfortunately, the world was bitter and bitchy even then, and when people heard that Epicurus had set up a school to study happiness, the rumours went off the scale. There were tales that the school hosted 10-course feasts and orgies every night. Epicurus was said by one critic to have orgasmed 18 times in a single evening in a bed filled with virgins. It wasn't true. Epicurus and his team were studying happiness, but they were doing it very soberly. The philosopher owned only 2 cloaks and lived on bread, olives, and for a treat, an occasional slice of cheese. As for the bedroom, he merely responded demurely that he'd married philosophy. Having patiently studied happiness for many years, Epicurus came to a set of remarkable and revolutionary conclusions about what we actually need to be happy. He proposed that we typically make 3 mistakes when thinking about happiness. Firstly, we think happiness means having romantic, sexual relationships. But Epicurus looked around and saw so many unhappy couples, their unions marred by jealousy, misunderstanding, cheating, and bitterness. At the same time, he observed how much nicer friendships are, how people tend to be so decent and unpossessive with their friends. Friendship seemed to be where human nature was at its sweetest. The only problem, Epicurus noted, was that we don't see our friends enough. The next thing we ordinarily think we need to be happy is a lot of money. But we tend not properly to factor in the unbelievable sacrifices we're going to have to make to get this money, the jealousy, the backbiting, the long hours. What makes work really satisfying, Epicurus believed, isn't money, but it's when we're able to work alone or in small groups like at a bakery or a boat repair shop, and when we feel we're helping others and in our own minor way improving the world. It isn't really large sums or status that we want deep down, it's a sense of making a difference. And lastly, Epicurus observed how obsessed we are with luxury, especially involving houses in beautiful, serene locations. But beneath our love of luxury, there's really something else we're trying to get at. What we want is a feeling of calm. We want our minds pure, free, not full of the normal bother and chaos. But the great question is, does luxury actually make us calm? Epicurus wasn't so sure. Having looked at happiness in depth, Epicurus announced a revolutionary set of insights. That you really need only 3 things to be happy in this life. Firstly, you need your friends around. No sex, no orgies, just your mates. Enough of seeing them only now and then. It's regularity of contact that counts. So he did that thing that most of us occasionally dream of doing, but never actually get around to. He bought a big house and started living with all his friends. Everyone had their own quarters, and there were pleasant shared areas too. There was always someone nice to talk to in the kitchen. Secondly, everyone downshifted. All the members of the commune stopped working for other people. They took big pay cuts in return for doing their own stuff. Some did farming, some cooking, some pottery or writing. And thirdly, Epicurus and his friends stopped thinking you could be calm just by having a beautiful view to look out on. They devoted themselves to finding calm in their own minds, through spending time on their own, reflecting, writing stuff down, reading things, meditating. The experiment was so successful, the members of the commune so happy, the idea spread like wildfire. Epicurean communities opened up all around the Mediterranean. At the height of the movement, there were 400,000 people living in communes from Spain to Palestine. It was only the Christian church that ended things in the 5th century, but they must have respected the community somehow, because they converted them all into monasteries. What we know as monasteries are really just Epicurean communes with a Christian topsoil. Another interesting fact, Karl Marx did his PhD thesis on Epicurus, and what we call communism, that gigantic, dour, joyless, failed system, is really a grown-up, corrupted, not very successful version of Epicureanism. The real legacy of Epicurus is that human beings aren't very good at making themselves happy, chiefly because they think it's so easy. We think we know it's about sex, money, luxury. We just wonder how to secure all these. But no, says Epicurus, reflect on the moments that truly bring you happiness, and they aren't to do with these. Have the courage to change your life in accordance with the moments that actually deliver satisfaction. You might end up living in a very different way, out in the country, with just some cheese, a couple of cloaks, a few philosophy books, and some very good friends down the corridor.
Last but not the least, hedonism, where pleasure is the only basic value, but one must obtain from unnecessary desires and achieve inner peace. In other words, people must look for what is needed to be happy, rather than getting their wants, which will only give them temporary happiness or pleasure. Hedonists believe that a person can be ultimately happy when one is contented with simple pleasures rather than happiness brought about by money or anything of big value. That's all for now, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you are having a great time. To my students, this is the end of our coverage for midterm exams. Good luck.